Good afternoon. I'm Jiro Kokurio, Vice President of Keio University, and I'm very happy and quite honored to welcome Professor Masaaki Shirakawa. And as President Seike introduced, Professor Shirakawa is the former governor of the Bank of Japan. And I guess everybody knows, but let me give you a little information about his background. Professor Shirakawa joined the Bank of Japan in 1972 and was appointed governor in April 2008 and left the bank in March of 2012. And while he was the governor, he has implemented and made very innovative decisions, including introduction of zero interest rate policy, quantitative easing, forward guidance, and many more, and which, by the way, has become somewhat of a standard policies that are adopted by many central governments of the world. Professor Shirakawa studied economics at the University of Tokyo and was a professor at Kyoto University School of Government from July 2006 to March 2008 before taking the job of the governor. And Professor Shirakawa is currently a professor at青山学院 University and a member of the Group of 30. And we are really fortunate to have him as a keynote speaker today, and who has tremendous knowledge about the topic of aging and, of course, the broad economy and society. So without further delay, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Professor Shirakawa to the podium.
First of all, good afternoon. It's my great honor and pleasure to speak before you. And I'd like to thank President Seike and Professor Fujiwara and Professor Kokurio and Keio University for inviting me to this symposium. And the title of this symposium is the Societal Aging and the Japanese Economy. And this is quite opportune time for us to talk about, to discuss this important issue. When I was a governor, I often talked about the importance of demographics in Japanese economy. And sometimes I was criticized for talking about demographics. You as a central bank governors, you just focus on monetary policy, period. But nonetheless, I felt it's my duty as a governor of central bank, which is ultimately responsible for stability of macroeconomy. And this issue is quite important, but nonetheless, the importance of this issue is not well understood. That's why I felt it's my duty to do so. I divide my talk into two parts. The first part is on the importance of demographics in Japanese economy. And second part is what I think is important as a future research agenda. I want to raise some issue which I think is important. So it goes, it needs to say that Japan has the most rapidly aging population in the world. In retrospect, total population, the working age population started to decline from 1995, and working age population started to decline from 2009, just 1 year after I became governor. And Japan's long-run demographic projection is very dire, as all of you know. As I said, the working population is already declining, and the share of working population is declining. Currently, it's about 60%, but in 2045, it will go down to 50%, and the share of population age over 65 is increasing to 45 to 35 in 2045. And it is only recent that people have come to realize the importance of this issue of demographics. And this shows the number of newspaper articles which has the keyword as bubble, non-performing loans, declining population, and declining birth rate or aging population. And this is used as a proxy for capturing what people think important. And in early part of 1990s, bubble was the biggest, as you can imagine. Then gradually, the non-performing loan is increasing. And the height of this title is the latter part of 1990s and early part of 2000, as you can imagine. And what about declining population or declining birth rate or aging population? And as for declining population, it is increasing slightly. As for the declining birth rate or aging population, it is gradually increasing. So this shows that people are now realizing the importance of this issue. But still, the level of awareness is a bit lower than that of non-performing loan. Of course, this is mechanical interpretation, so I'm not saying literally this, but still the awareness is not that enough. As I said, the issue of demographics is still not well understood in Japan at both policy and academic circles. The reason why I say this is the expression which is often used in the discussion of macroeconomic policy. I think the most popular phraseology which is used in macroeconomic policy debate is, for instance, Japanese lost decades or Japanese style of deflation. These are almost cliché. But do these expressions really capture the very fundamental challenges facing Japanese economy? My answer is no. This is one of my favorite charts. This is the growth of GDP. This is a comparison of GDP among major economies. The starting point is 2000. And so this is average of the growth in the past 13 years or so. If we look at real GDP, Japan growth rate is the lowest. That's why we call it Japan's lost decade. But if we look at the GDP, the growth of GDP per capita, then of course Japan is not so good, but this is just average among major economies. And if we look at the growth of GDP per working age population, then Japan is highest, much higher than that of United States. And this chart, this international comparison shows several things. The first implication is a decade is long enough for us to neglect the impact of rapid aging or change in demographics. If we talk about growth, say, this year or next year, it doesn't matter which we talk about in terms of GDP growth or GDP per capita and GDP per working population. But 10 years is long enough. The second is Japanese economy is not that bad as is implied by lost decade in terms of growth of living standard of average citizen, which is captured by GDP growth of GDP per capita. But a sober fact is that fraction of people who can work is shrinking, And those people have to support growing number of aged people. This is a very sober fact. That's why I say demographics is very important. This is a sort of growth accounting, very simple growth accounting. And the point is here, if we assume the labor participation rate for the gender and age cohort remains the same, then we can calculate the expected decline of workforce. For the next decade, decline of workers will be 0.6%, and for the next decade, it will be 0.8%, and for the next decade, it will be 1.2%. And as I said previously, the growth of the productivity is not that bad, a bit above 1%. But even if we combine this number, and the growth decline of labor force, then resulting number, that is growth of potential growth rate, is less than 0.5%. And over time, it will decline. Of course, it is assumed, it is calculated on the assumption that participation rate remains the same. So, of course, there's a room for us to boost participation rate, and this is quite important. And now, government is trying to boost this ratio, and this is quite important and meaningful. The critical issue is about sustainability. So far, in terms of growth of living standard, the situation is, of course, not so good, but not so bad as is implied by last decade. But the future is very dire. Sustainability can be threatened on several grounds. The one is economic growth. The aging is a long process. So we have to distinguish about which phase we are talking about. In the first stage, the workforce is not decreasing, but people expect that eventually population will decline, and this expectation will decrease demand. For instance, if consumers think about uncertainty over Social Security, it may affect consumption. Or if firms expect that domestic market will shrink, then they will cut the investment. So for the first stage, demand is affected. For the second stage, actual decline in workforce starts. And the third stage, very aged people needs growing number of caring and nursing people. This is mechanical extrapolation. Okay. This shows the number of aged people, the number of Medicare, the people who is engaged in Medicare, the number of people engaged in nursing care, and all these are increasing. And this shows the fraction. And I don't know how many people are needed for taking care of aged people. But if we assume coefficient remains the same as the current level, we can extrapolate the number of people who are engaged in these services. We often talk about working age population, but if we subtract the number of people who are engaged in medical service or nursing care, the the number of effective working age population might decline. Of course, those people are producing value added. So this calculation might be a bit politically incorrect, but this can capture some flavor, the issue of this issue. So my point is aging affect not only aging affect labor supply, not only in terms of actual reduction in workforce, but also in terms of people who are taking care of all these people. The government finance is also affected, of course. I skipped this part. I guess this issue is dealt in the subsequent session. And also, the aging affect the region and differently. This map shows the difference in the ratio of aged people to total population in each prefecture. And there are a lot of variation. Each region does need the public infrastructure, sort of, the hospital, schools, the transportation, etc. And these services need fixed costs. And given rapid aging and given decline in population, it is becoming costly to maintain those infrastructure. That's why sustainability of each region is threatened. And these issues, the importance of population demographics is well understood by John Maynard Keynes. And he said, he made a famous speech, some economic consequences of a declining population. This speech was made in 1937. And we know much more securely than we know almost any other social or economic factor relating to the future that in the place of the steady and indeed steeply rising level of population, which we have experienced for a great number of decades, we shall be facing a very short time with a stationary or declining level. The rate of decline is doubtful, but it is virtually certain that the changeover compared with what we have been used to will be substantial. We have this unusual degree of knowledge concerning the future because of long but definite time lag in the effect of vital statistics. Nevertheless, the idea of future being different from the present is so repugnant to our conventional modes of thought and behavior that most of us offer a great deal of resistance to acting on it in practice. And viewed from today, what he said, he is both right and both right and wrong. The wrong part of his speech is his prediction on demographics was turned to be wrong. And actually, after World War II, the population the fertility rate started to increase. In that regard, he was wrong. But his intuition in terms of recognition is quite clear. And when I observe the situation in Japanese debate on demographics in the past 15 years or so, his insight is quite right. And the idea of future being different from the present is so repugnant to a conventional mode of thought and behavior that we offer a great deal of resistance to acting on it in practice. And as I said, in terms of the number of newspaper articles, people were so delayed in recognizing this important issue. Why do people underestimate the importance of demographics and procrastinate? There are several hypotheses. It's a very slow-moving picture. It took long to accept the decline in fertility rate as a trend. Population continued to increase long after fertility rate declined below replacement level because of longer longevity. And very often, the peak of population bonus coincides with a bubble which masks underlying problems. When society goes beyond a critical point of aging, it's hard to forge a politically feasible consensus because of conflicting interests between generations, so-called silver democracy. And people do not want to hear gloomy story. That's what is happening. I skip the interest of time. I skip this explanation. And the silver democracy, the median age of voters is now 45.6. Given this tendency, the role of academic economists becomes all the more important. But they also tended to be optimistic, I would say. Several hypotheses, no treatment in standard textbook. There is no distinction between population and working age population in growth theory. Of course, there are some, but at least when I studied growth theory in University of Chicago many years ago, there was no distinction between the two. And in that regard, problems are assumed away. Belief in substitution of capital for labor and or optimism for demographic-induced innovation. And these are leading to underinvestment in the study of demographics. Japan is offering many interesting food for thought in demographics as well. After all, Japan was a forerunner, as President Seike said. Japan experienced bubble, financial crisis, and decline in inflation or mild deflation ahead of other countries. The same is true for demographics. Other advanced economies and emerging economies are now being faced with the same problem with some time lag. I will skip this one. Part 2, the issues which I think is important and I want to highlight in order for academics to tackle with in future study. There are many, but today I'd like to categorize these things into 4. One is demographics and potential growth rate. Fertility rate. As Keynes predicted, he predicted population will decline. And his observation, his prediction was justifiable. And this is a fertility rate, long-term trend of fertility rate in United States. It's started with 1800, and fertility rate declined. And bottom was in 1930. The same is true for other countries. But after World War II, fertility rate jumped. And the same phenomena observed not only in the United States, but also in other countries, including Japan. And after all, what is the reason? What explains for variation, the change in fertility rate? And there is no clear-cut answer. Second is immigration. The importance of this issue is different from across countries. And when I talk about this kind of issue with my American friend, they are rather sanguine about this issue. And this is quite understandable. But even in the United States, over time, this could become the problem. The issue, when we talk about immigration, we have to also talk about immigration. After all, immigration needs immigration. And this is the growth of working age population of Mexico. And even in Mexico, it is declining rapidly. And this is the average of top 10 countries in terms of US immigrant. This is declining. So both demand and supply are important. And so this is another issue. Innovation. The innovation is the most important factor explaining growth. And of course, we don't know how innovation is created. And if aging is really serious, then we can expect some innovation will be created. And this is a general statement, but if also we have to think about who will be engaged in innovation. And relatively speaking, young people are prone to innovation, but aging means that fraction of young people who are engaged in innovation will decline. So this might affect growth rate as well. And fourthly, the politics. As I said, silver democracy is prevails. And if economy, society goes beyond certain critical point, then it's quite hard to forge the politically the feasible solution. And then economic policy might be biased in terms of maintaining the status quo rather than promoting growth. The second topic is demographics and inflation rate, which might be regarded as a kind of heresy, but this is the growth of working age population, and this is inflation rate. And if we look at data in 2000, we can see this positive relationship. And is this just spurious correlation? This is the comparison between potential growth rate and expected emission rate. Again, there's some correlation. Of course, there's no mechanical causal relationship from demographics to inflation. I'm not saying that. And my point is, what kind of mechanism, what these seeming correlation is capturing? The inflation dynamics is very complicated. But my hunch is these relationships capture some element explaining inflation dynamics. And we have to think about what is represented for this chart. Again, we have to distinguish between phases. In the early stage, the effect on demand precedes, as I said previously. So if other thing is equal, then expected decline in demand might decrease inflation rate. But at later stage, situation might be different. I'm now the definition of working age population is people aged between 15 and 64. And 2 months ago, I became 65. So I'm not classified as working age population anymore. But still, I'm working a bit. So in that sense, I belong to broadly defined working age population. But I'm a last age cohort of baby boomers. I was born in 1949. And the past few years, those people retired completely. When I attended the alumni meeting of my classmate, my university or high school, roughly speaking, 30% or 40% of my classmates were already completely retired, and they are enjoying their life. And so, as Hayakawa-san sitting over there described, this might be called the difference between consumption population and the production population. In terms of population, in the past few years, population is decreasing a lot. In terms of consumption population, it is not decreasing. Rather, it may be increasing. And consumption, and those active retired people are engaged in various activities, and in general, those activities are labor intensive. So all in all, labor market condition is now becoming tight. So in this phase, inflation rate might be increased. So we have to distinguish between phases. Third, demographics and financial stability. Demographics could affect financial stability through creating bubble due to following two channels. First, a trend decline in profitability against the backdrop of a decline in potential growth rate, coupled with prolonged low interest rate, could create bubbles. And the second is property prices are affected importantly by demographic factors. This is the favorite chart. This is a favorite chart of the Deputy Governor, Mr. Nishimura, and I cited his work. And this purple line shows the development of real property prices, and this line shows the ratio of, basically, this line shows the ratio of working age population. And as long as the ratio is increasing, people demand housing, it could increase property prices. And in the United States, it seems both are coincided. In Japan, it is coincided. The same is true for UK, Spain, and Ireland. Of course, this is very, very the casual observation. So this is just hypothesis, but nobody can deny the fact that demographics affect property prices. Also, demographics could affect financial stability through government finance. And the deficit on the budget is mainly due to the increase in expenditure on Social Security. So demographics is quite important. And financial stability crucially depends on fiscal sustainability. So if fiscal sustainability is questioned, then demographics could affect financial stability through this channel. Finally, demographics and politics. How can we reflect voices of future generation in political process? I mentioned about silver democracy several times, but people are not that egoistic. And I have 2 grandkids, and my wife and I are naturally concerned about the future of our daughters and our grandkids. And we can count on a kind of altruism. And what kind of altruism mechanism could work? And those kind of issues. And also how to integrate, reflect those kind of altruism into actual political decision. And this is also important subject. Final words. In late 1990s, I attended many international meetings. In those days, I tried to explain what Japan was muddling through. But in those days, Japan was regarded as the country which just made simple mistake. And all these expenses were just dismissed. And it was only after global financial crisis erupted that these problems are reasonably well understood by academics and policymakers outside Japan. Still, understanding is not that sufficient, but the situation has improved. But today I feel the same with state of debate of demographics, though situation is improving. I'm not fatalist, and I'm afraid that I am a fatalist. I'm not saying that demographic determines everything. I'm not saying that. What is critically important is how to adapt institutions to changing reality of economy. That is demographic. And starting point is clear recognition of what is happening in demographics and how it is affecting the economy. So I really hope many academics and academics to tackle with this important issue of demographics. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a student in the Faculty of Economics, and my question is, do you think today in developed countries, and especially Japan, the modification of the retirement age should be the focus target in expanding the workforce?
Your question is, whether to increase retirement age?
Yes.
Yeah. We talked about this issue before we came to this room, and I'm not expert on this particular issue, but the definition of retirement age is somewhat elusive. And for instance, I already my age is 65, so as long as we stick with definition of mandatory retirement age, for instance, I'm already retired person, but still I'm reasonably active. And what's important is how to mobilize those people who have aspiration for wanting to contribute to society, more or less. And in that regard, I think it's critically important to raise effective age of retirement. And although without exerting undue influence on people who are actually working. And for instance, in Japanese institution, if aged people continue to work, then young people might be discouraged. It's very detrimental in terms of raising productivity. So we have to create new equilibrium in that regards.
Perhaps one more?
Thank you very much for your speech. I have a question. I come from China, and I am studying here. So in your point, the reason influence the demographic is the working age people are decreasing. So do you think Japan needs to increase more immigrants in the future to solve this? Thank you.
Yeah. This issue is, again, quite important. And the answer is not yes or no answer. For instance, we should accept more foreign workers, say in the high-scale job, and also we need more foreign workers in Medicare, etc. And it depends. But as I said in my presentation, the decline of labor force is so huge. So this issue is not solved by receiving immigration. Of course, if we take the huge number of foreign workers, all of a sudden, mechanically speaking, the problem might be created, it might be solved. But at the same time, another problem might be created. And I'm not chauvinist, I'm not a jingoist, but also we have to think about the very basis of society. So we have to strike a balance. But in a nutshell, my point is we have to accept more foreign workers in certain areas under certain conditions.
Thank you very much. As much as I'd like to continue, I'm sure there are more questions. I'm afraid we have run out of time for this particular part. I'd like you to join me in thanking Professor Shirakawa for setting a very clear agenda for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.